We have gathered here today to respond to the statement made by Minister Fay yesterday, which set out the government's position in respect to PRC holders. On July the 11th, the People's Campaign issued a press statement that set out the position of the People's Campaign in respect to this issue. We had hoped that in the spirit of transparency, inclusiveness, that an honest public conversation between all of the stakeholders would have been welcomed by, and in fact led by, the government, so that a just and fair resolution of this issue could be reached. To our great disappointment, no such conversation was forthcoming, and it appears that the government engaged in a deliberate policy of silence and avoidance, and indeed waited until the House of Assembly was in recess to even make a public announcement on this issue. It seems to be a government strategy to listen, placate, and then ignore the concerns of the people and proceed along an undisclosed, preordained path when it comes to policy. Let us also begin by removing all of the erroneous and distracting charges coming from some quarters regarding xenophobia. It is our position that PRC holders who have and continue to contribute to Bermuda should be provided with a fair and reasonable opportunity to pursue status if they so desire. The fear and scaremongering of some people who have attempted to generate hysteria around PRC holders stealing jobs and opportunities from Bermudians, we likewise reject in the strongest terms. What we find to be equally disingenuous at best and blatantly dishonest on the part of the government at worst is the fact that it seems that while the government not only acknowledges but agrees that the loophole, or as the Chief Justice referred to it, the sleeping provision, provides a backdoor that violates the intent of the legislation, which was never intended to provide a path to status. They are willing to not only allow it to stand, but are willing to allow it to be used and indeed use it themselves. The honorable thing to do, instead of engaging in the politics of avoidance or the politics of blame, PLP did it, so why should we change it? The honorable thing would have been to close the loophole legislatively and then engage in a more reasoned and well-thought-out policy that would provide PRC holders who seek status with a path and an opportunity to attain it. When any government concedes that there is a flaw in policy but chooses, instead of correcting it, to appear to use it as a political device, it destroys and erodes public confidence in the honesty and integrity of the government. The existing policy is flawed with its own limitations and problems. So, for instance, if a PRC holder has been in Bermuda since August 2nd, 1989, then based upon the loophole, they would not be eligible for status. For a government driven by compassion and fairness to allow such an arbitrary distinction, which in effect discriminates and disqualifies persons who have shown an equal level of commitment and have contributed as much to Bermuda as those who were in Bermuda up to August 1st, 1989, is an egregious offense. Similarly, if a PRC holder wishes to pursue status and has been in Bermuda for a sustained period of time, why should the spouse of such persons not be included in their application for status, rather than having to wait 10 years following the granting or the application of the status to their spouse? These and other complications create unfairness and discrimination and hardship, and could have been remedied if the government was serious about being fair and compassionate and would have taken the time to develop a good policy. It is not too late to correct this matter, and so we are calling upon the government, number one, to immediately suspend the granting of status based upon this legislative loophole. Number two, to work on and be prepared to present a revised policy that would provide a reasonable and fair path to status for PRC holders. In conclusion, it is even more alarming that Minister Fay, on behalf of the government in his statement, has claimed that their decision was in part based upon a poll that they conducted with a sample size of 404 Bermuda residents out of a population of over 60,000 people, of which only 57%, 230 people of those polled allegedly supported the granting of Bermuda status to PRC holders. If persons were polled on whether they agreed with granting status, that is one question. But if they were aware that the granting of status was based upon an unintended loophole in legislation, would they have responded the same way? Or if they were asked if the government should close the loophole, what do you think the answer would have been to those questions? This represents an alarming trend that escalates the already growing lack of confidence in the way this government conducts the business of the people. We are calling upon all Bermudians and people of goodwill to join us in expressing our call for the government to reconsider their position on this matter and to conduct the business of government with the integrity and honesty that the people expect from those elected to serve them. We are asking all supporters of the People's Campaign, all union members, and all people of goodwill to join us tomorrow at Victoria Park at 12 noon, where we will gather, and from there we will make our way to the Cabinet Office building and let our voices be heard. Thank you very much. This time, if there are any questions.
What's the harm in granting these folks status through this avenue? Talk about that.
I think, as articulated in the position and the statement that we have issued, people want to make this about the human face of PRC holders. That's not the issue. We support eligible PRC holders having a path to status. What we object to and what we consider to be bad government is when legislators know that legislation is flawed and then choose to utilize legislation for their own benefit and advantage. That's the problem.
Is that not a semantics game, though? I mean, who will be harmed if all these PRC holders are granted status through this avenue?
It's not a question of harm, it's a question of honesty and integrity. If the government wants to provide a path for PRC holders to gain status, come out and say it. Don't hide behind a loophole that you can conveniently blame on someone else for having provided.
Do you feel like the OBA government set out to lose the appeal?
I think that the OBA government, if they consulted with legal representation prior to the appeal, would have known legally that the case was very thin and had little to no chance of success.
So do you think the legal arguments that were put forth were not the best legal arguments? You had mentioned the original intent of the legislation. My understanding is that in the appeal, that argument was not put forth. Do you have any thoughts about that?
My thoughts about it are that it was never a legal issue. It was always a legislative one. And it was, in my mind, dishonest to pursue a legal remedy to a problem that you knew going in was legislative.
Reverend Tree, with all the independent decisions being made with the government, do you feel we're being governed or ruled?
Well, I think that, and I'll let some of my colleagues chime in on this as well, I think what happens is clearly the people do not feel that they are either being heard or represented.
And if I can add just one other thing to what Reverend Tree just said, if you look at the statement that the minister gave to the World Gazette, or gave to the media yesterday and appeared in the World Gazette today, and his statement in the end was that to the people of Bermuda, stay calm even though you may not like the decisions that have been made. I mean, that statement within itself tells you that you should be very concerned because the government are going to make these decisions because as Reverend Tree read out a few minutes ago, if the government done a poll last week, Tuesday, and they polled 404 individuals that represented 57% or 230 individuals, certainly when the People's Campaign issued that letter on July the 11th, right, representing some 3,000 plus voters, you got a poll that represents 400 individuals or 230 people. You're listening to a poll of 230, but you're not listening to 3,000 people that have said something to you. So I have some problems with the numbers that the government and the minister are putting together in respect to whether or not they're really listening to the people.
And then when you compound that with the kind of paternal arrogance that says to the people, well, we know you don't like your medicine, but just suck it up and take it. That becomes very egregious in a country where people are already disillusioned and are losing confidence in government.
Is the aim of the march to call for the dissolution of the government?
No.
What's
What
your,
is the aim? What is the aim?
The aim of the march is to challenge the government to do what we think it should have done in the first place, and that is to close the loophole and then to make a commitment to provide a policy that provides a reasonable path for status for PRC holders that seek it and are eligible.
You mentioned the government was allowing this loophole to be used, and also they were using it themselves. What did you mean by that?
What I mean is, if you know that there's a loophole that was unintended, and now it appears based on Minister Faye's statement, you are now actively allowing it to be used as a process, to substitute for a process, then that constitutes you aiding and abetting a process that is really in violation of the intent of the legislation. And as a legislator, you are duty-bound to uphold the intent and the spirit of the law.